Daniel Barkowitz. I think, and I am thrilled to be joining you tonight to give you information about the FAFSA and to welcome you to our family FAFSA training. Again, my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I currently serve as the Assistant Vice President of Financial Assistance and Student Employment at the University of Miami, here in Miami, Florida, where I'm calling in from tonight, or dialing in from tonight, or virtually connecting in from tonight. We'd love to see where you all are from. So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat what city and state you're connecting in from this evening. Are you in Florida? Are you somewhere else? Where are you connecting in? So please feel free to navigate to our chat feature on Zoom. If you don't know, it's on the buttons either on the top or bottom of your screen. And go ahead and type in the city and state you're connecting in from this evening as we get started. We did, for those of you who arrived early, we had a little bit of music just to help sort of set the mood as we get started. And it's my joy and pleasure really to be with you for the next hour and a little bit to help explain, oh, another Miami, Florida person, that's awesome. To help explain the FAFSA, explain why we're really focused on FAFSA completion this year, what's been going on, and give you some background to help prepare you either complete your own FAFSA, your students' FAFSA, or to help potentially others in your community to get their FAFSA completed. So as we get started, a couple of just housekeeping announcements. First of all, please feel free if you have questions. We do have a Q&A box. You should feel free to ask your questions in our Q&A box. Please use the chat if you want to respond to questions that I'm asking you. But for questions you want to ask us, please make sure to post them in the questions and answer box. We actually will answer them there. We'll also answer them live online. We have a number of financial aid experts in the background who are here ready and willing and able to assist you as we move forward tonight to make sure all of your questions are answered. We are, as you saw, recording tonight's webinar. So after tonight, we will share with you a link to the recording. So if you want to take good notes and copies of the screens and those sorts of things, feel free. As I say, we'll also post a copy of the recording for you. And the PowerPoint we'll share when we start looking through the FAFSA itself is also posted online. So if you want to download that for your own reference or look at it later, you should feel free to do so. So with that, I want to extend a really sincere thanks to Bridge for Life and the Broward Education Foundation. This partnership has really been critical in getting FAFSA training done this summer. Tonight is our last FAFSA training for the summer. This was funded by a grant from the federal government through ECMC. And tonight is our final in a series of 8 virtual, 2 in-person events, and a number of other outreach efforts. So again, I'm really thrilled and pleased that we can be with you this evening. And I'm glad you're joining us tonight as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to dive in and begin. And what I thought we could do to start is review a little bit about why this year has been so unusual. If you're a parent or a student, you've seen this maybe first in hand, but I want to spend a little time just explaining why FAFSA completion matters, helping you understand a little bit about what we'll call the FAFSA fiasco of 2024, making sure you're clear about why it isn't too late to get involved, to actually get your FAFSA completed, and help you understand how you can be part of the solution. And as a reward for those of you who stay with us tonight and get your FAFSA completed, if you provide proof of that, we, through the partnership with the federal government and Bridge to Life and the Broward Educational Foundation, we will offer you a $20 Amazon gift card for each FAFSA or for your FAFSA completion. So if you do your FAFSA, you will get that $20 gift card with documentation of your completion. So what is the FAFSA, first of all? The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and it is the federal government's main application for financial assistance for college education, college, university, anything that's post-high school. And what's really critical to understand is that seniors who are in high school are much more likely to go immediately to college if they do a FAFSA. So FAFSA is the single greatest predictor of college attendance. FAFSA completion leads to college attendance. And what we know this year is that we've struggled to get students can complete FAFSA, and I'll explain why as we go forward. What's also important to understand is that there's a lot of money that's given away every year in federal, state, institutional, and other financial aid. But what's important as we look at this pie chart is I know a lot of families have a misunderstanding and think that it's mostly loans. If you watch the news these days, if you think about what's going on, in terms of loan forgiveness, you probably have heard about the student loan crisis we're facing. Well, the truth is that nationwide, about 60% of the money given out every year is given out in the form of grants and scholarships, about a third in the form of loans, about 5% in tax benefits, and about 1% in work awards. And if you look, the biggest piece of pie in this little pie chart over here is this institutional grant number. And that is how much institutions themselves give to students. So, really important, by filling out the FAFSA, you get access to institutional grants, potentially private grants, state grants, and other programs. So, the FAFSA, again, is your entry point. So, in a normal year, the way that the application process would work is that on October 1 of a student's senior year in high school, the FAFSA would open. And students could then log in and complete their FAFSA. Many students just do a FAFSA. Some students who apply to more selective institutions or institutions that require the CSS profile, which is the secondary application. Some students will do that CSS profile, or they may do other applications as well. If you're in Florida, there's a Florida financial aid application. So again, you may wind up doing those as part of your admissions process or your application process. That's a normal year, and that starts, as I said, somewhere, it starts on October 1, and you may complete that somewhere in the next month or two. And usually, aid offices or aid offers are prepared and sent to families and students with the admissions offer. So as you're notified that you've been admitted into the institution, you also at that point receive your financial aid offer. So that's a normal year. This year has been anything but normal. And I want to sort of help you understand why and what some of the impacts have been. Well, the why is that there's been a major rewrite of the federal financial aid system. And this rewrite was caused by two laws that were passed by Congress, one being the FAFSA Simplification Act of 2020, and the other being the Future Act of 2019. These two laws required that the entire financial aid system be rebuilt basically from scratch. And so as a result, it required a re-engineering and a reprogramming of all the computer systems that FAFSA uses to run its operation. And you can imagine there are millions and millions of FAFSA filers every year. Originally, this was targeted for the 23-24 academic year, the year that just ended. But the government realized they needed more time. Federal Student Aid and the Department of Education came back to Congress and asked them for an extension. And this year, the 24-25 year, has been the rollout year. And to say there have been some problems is underselling it. There have been a lot of issues this year, and you may have faced some of these as students or parents. Number one, the launch date, remember I said usually is October 1, it was delayed. Didn't go live October 1, didn't go live November 1, didn't go live December 1, didn't go live until December 30th. And that's only sort of. It was live for about an hour on December 30th. And it really didn't go live 24/7 until about the second week of January. That said, once families could access the FAFSA, schools didn't get the data that families had put into the FAFSA until mid-March. In most years, we get the data as soon as families file the FAFSA. This year, it was delayed. And what we found when we got the data is that some of it was wrong. So one of the key features of this year's FAFSA has been the ability not to have to enter your tax information, that just to be transferred directly over from the IRS. And there were problems in how that setup was built, and there were problems with some of the questions, and you can see some of the other problems. The problems continue even to this week. We just got news this week that the federal government's not going to build a corrections module for schools to submit corrections to FAFSA data. We're going to have to do that by hand, where typically we do that in batch mode. So as a result, it's just been a very, very fraught year. So I don't blame students or parents for sitting back and waiting. But now is the time. Now is the time to get this done this year because time is running short. And so I want to share a little about the national impact so you understand the context in which we're sitting. And this comes from NCAN's FAFSA tracker. NCAN is the National College Attainment Network. And looking just at the graduating seniors from high school, what we note is that there's been a marked difference between last year's seniors in high school and this year's seniors in high school. You can see that by the orange line versus the light blue line. The orange line is last year's seniors. The blue line is this year's seniors, the ones who just graduated. And year over year, you can see the decline in applications. Now, the good news is we're not as bad as we were in April. We're closing the gap. We're now about 7 percentage points behind, and that represents about a 10.4% drop over last year. We would like it to be even, if not greater, than last year's numbers because of what I told you before. Seniors who complete a FAFSA are much more likely to go to college. How does this look state by state? Well, first of all, you can see on the left side of the screen where Florida sits. And we're focused on Florida because while we are based in Florida, this webinar is really an outreach nationwide, but we want to share with you some Florida statistics as well. So Florida, of the 50 states in the country, but actually 52 when you add Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., Florida is number 46 in terms of completion at this point. Only about 37.8% of our graduated seniors in high school this year completed a FAFSA to date. The better news, slightly better news, is if you look at the year over year change, we're only down about 11%. That is much better than we've been earlier in the cycle. And I would say in part, it's because of the work we've done with this effort to try to encourage families and students to complete their FAFSA. So there is room to grow and there are things to do, but we're getting there. It is not too late to apply for fall financial aid. And these are the reasons why now is the time and why we're glad to have you tonight. It is not too late for you to complete your application for fall financial aid. It's getting close, but it's not too late. It isn't too late to apply for fall admission, especially at our local state and community colleges. Many of them are still taking admissions applications. You're close to the deadline and you're close to the end of the process, but at this point, still, it is not too late. It is also not too late to apply for spring admission since many of our institutions have open spots for spring. So if you've maybe given up on fall, but you still are interested in potential spring admission, keep in mind that you can still apply for admission to many of our great schools around the country that have spots for spring. And actually, the other piece is just keep in mind it's not too late, even if you've already enrolled and you've made your decision to attend, but you just gave up on getting your FAFSA done. There's no deadline per se to get the FAFSA done, as long as you get it done during the academic year. So you have time to get the FAFSA done. There is separately a deadline for us to give you that $20 Amazon gift card, though, which I'll talk about a little later. But again, please make sure you know you can still apply to complete the FAFSA, even if you decided I'm not going to do it, or I'm too overwhelmed, or whatever that might be. Okay, so what I would like to do then is I would like to, with that in mind, I would like us to actually begin to look at the FAFSA itself and spend some time walking through the form. So I am going to share with you a presentation that comes from the Department of Education. There are 312 slides in this presentation. Please don't worry, we are not going to go through every one of the 312 slides. I'm going to highlight the information for you that's important so you can see it. And I'll highlight where there's some questions that might trip some parents and students up, and we'll go through that together. But this 312-page slide deck is available for you, and I'll show you where that is after we're done this evening. So if you want to download the whole thing, you can certainly do that and take a look at all the different screenshots. As we walk through, just an overview, so we're going to see screenshots that show what you would see as you walk through the form online. This is intended to show you how it would look like. We're going to give you a standard student example. and basically walk it through. So there are a couple of really important pieces as we get started. The first is that every person who's going to complete a FAFSA needs to have an FSA ID. FSA stands for Federal Student Aid. Remember, FAFSA was the free application for federal student aid. So the FSA part is Federal Student Aid. And your ID is a combination of a username and password that allows you entry into the system. Every student's going to need an FSA ID. And that's going to be like, you would use to access your bank account or your credit card or whatever online system you have, your library account, whatever. You're going to need a combination of a username and password. The difference with this one is it takes a little longer for you to register that FSA ID because the government's going to take your basic biographical information, your social security number, your date of birth, your last name, and they're going to match you against their databases to prove that you are who you say you are. The reason that's important is because to access your IRS information, we need to make sure we have correct, balanced, and connected information. That FSA ID can take 1 to 3 days to certify. So before you do your FAFSA, you want to make sure that you've registered for an FSA ID. If you don't have a social security number, you can still register for an FSA ID. There's no restriction for that, and you should be able still to access the form. So who has to have an FSA ID? Well, every student has to have an FSA ID, and at least one parent for a dependent student has to have an FSA ID. It's possible the second parent will need one as well, and I'll walk you through that when we go through the form a little later as to why you might need one. So the form is what's called a roles-based form. And what that means is based on who you are, you'll be able to see different sections of the application. If you're a student, you can see the student section. If you're a parent, you can only see the parent section. You can't answer the student section questions. You can't see their responses. Each one is limited to just their section. Once all the data is complete, all the sections have been signed, then anyone can submit the form, but that's how that process works. And there's this new term that we want to define for you this year called a contributor. What's a contributor? Well, we're not talking about contributing money. What we're talking about here is contributing information. So anyone who's going to provide information on the FAFSA form is considered a contributor. The student is always going to be a contributor. The parent is likely going to be a contributor. If you have a dependent student, we'll talk about that a little later. Parent's spouse may be a contributor. A student's spouse, if they have one, might be a contributor. And contributors have to provide their information, they have to sign their form, and they have to provide consent. And we'll look at that as well as we go through the process. This is just some more background information, and we're going to walk through sort of the way a normal application would work for a dependent student who invites their parents to complete. This is the best way to do the application, so we're going to walk through it this way. So the first thing you're going to do is once you have that FSA ID, you're going to log in to the system. And the way you log in is you navigate to, and I'll type this in the chat for you, but it's www.studentaid.gov. So again, www.studentaid.gov. That is the home for all things financial aid. And maybe one of my background people can help me by turning that into an actual web link rather than just my little typed information. That would be helpful. Thank you. So once you get to there, you'll see this button that says, or this launch that says FAFSA form. That's how you pull that down, and you can connect into the FAFSA form to complete the FAFSA form itself. And you'll see when you get to this page that it says Start New Form, and that is where you will begin the application. If you've already done a form, you can access your existing form by clicking on the other button. But for us today, and thank you, Jenny, for that, for us today, we're going to start with, again, we're going to start with Start a New Form. So once we click that button, Start a New Form, the next page comes up, asks us to log in, and we're going to use that combination of that username and password. And we're going to see the slides tonight answered from a student named Raya Tran, who is our sample student. And this is her login and password. If you don't have one, you would click on create account or create an account here, and you could go through and create that FSA ID for yourself. But that's how the process works. Once you've logged in, you're going to choose what role you are. And remember, we said Raya is going to start as a student. So she's going to click I am a student, and she's going to click continue. We don't recommend a parent starting. We recommend the student do their section first. It connects it better, and we'll walk through why that is as we go. Okay, so as we look through this tonight, a lot of the slides, a lot of the pages are going to look the same between the parent side and the student side. So where that's the case, I'm going to tell you that. And then when we get to the parent side, we're going to move fairly quickly through those pages because we will have seen almost everything that a parent sees by just looking at the student version of them. So these first 4 slides are examples of that, first 4 pages. The first 4 pages of the application are videos that help walk you through what are the requirements, why would you do a FAFSA, what's a contributor, etc. So as you go through, you'll see on each page, excuse me, the information about who is a contributor, what documents do you need, what is consent, and what happens after I submit a FAFSA. So all that information is just in those videos. You can watch them if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to, but they're there for information for you. Once you move past that, you'll then see a page that confirms the identity of the person who's logged in. So you see Raya's name, her date of birth, and some other biographical information. If any of that's wrong, you can log in and correct that via account settings. So the next page is the one that causes some confusion among parents and students, and I want to spend a little time just making sure you have the answers here. So this asks for state of legal residence. So for many students, if they're living in their state they were born in, that date that they became a legal resident would be the date that they were born. So month and year of their birth. If they've moved to the state, so let's say I was born in Massachusetts, but I moved to Florida, it would be the month and year that I moved to Florida. The reason this date is important is because it's used by state scholarship agencies and state public institutions to determine whether you qualify or whether you qualify for in-state tuition or their scholarship programs. In the state of Florida, you have to have lived in Florida for at least a year before you begin college to qualify for in-state tuition and potentially for some of the state scholarship programs. So again, really important that you answer this question properly as a student. For parents, sometimes parents may not live in the state of their birth. They may have moved. Maybe they have different dates that they've moved. As long as that date is, 3 to 5 years in the past, it's not such a big deal, but probably parents, when it comes to their turn, want to choose the parent who has the longer date of residence and actually entered that as the answer. The next page asks for consent. And again, this is a really important piece. Each contributor has to provide consent to pick their information up from the IRS website or IRS database and bring it over to the FAFSA. If you do not consent, then nothing will happen with your FAFSA. You will not be approved. You will not qualify for financial aid. It's really important that everyone who's required to complete the FAFSA provide consent. And consent is separately required from the student and from the parent. So this page is asking for the student consent. Now you might say, what if a student doesn't have taxes that they file? They don't have any earnings. They don't file a tax return. Why do they have to provide consent? The reason for that is because the IRS needs to search their database and make sure there is no match. So everyone, whether you file taxes or not, is going to be sent over to the IRS database for a match. And the only way that's possible is by providing consent. So when you click approve at the end of this long section, that is how you've provided consent as a student. You'll see a very similar set of pages for parents as well. Okay, so now you're going to see sort of how the FAFSA tells you we're in different sections. So we're about to start the first section of the FAFSA. And this section of the FAFSA helps us understand, is this a dependent or an independent student? Meaning, do we need parent information because they're a dependent student, or are they an independent student and we don't need to collect their parents' information, but we might need a spouse or spouse information? So you'll see this blue section, blue page that identifies we're starting a new section of the application. And as you step in, you'll also see on the top, there are 5 sections of this application for students. So we're starting in section 1, personal circumstances. Now, our student, Raya Tran, is a single student who has never been married. But the FAFSA is an application that everyone completes, right? Our 17-year-old Raya Tran is completing this, but if I went back to school as a 55-year-old, I would complete this application to say, I want to get my undergraduate degree or my graduate degree. It's the same application, right? So anyone who completes this application is going to see all of these questions up to this point. So you might wonder why Raya is asked. Well, she's asked because this application is the same application regardless of who the student is. And for Raya, she's going to say single, never married. And that's the first indication that she might be a dependent student. Students who are married or remarried or divorced or widowed are automatically independent. But in her case, we still have to get some more information to figure out, is she dependent or independent? The next question asks, what year in college will you be when you start this academic year? Raya is going to be a first-year freshman. Well, maybe she has dual enrollment credits or AP credits or something like that, but she's never been to college before. So she's still going to answer first-year freshman. I have a bachelor's degree. So if I see this page, I would answer master's, doctorate, or graduate. Students who are pursuing a master's degree are automatically independent. But in Raya's case, she looks like she might still be a dependent student. So we're not sure. We have to keep on going to see, but she's a first year freshman. The bottom of the page asks, do you already have your first bachelor's degree when you start the school year? This is really important, especially because students who graduate high school did not earn their bachelor's degree. Sometimes students get confused and think this is asking about my high school diploma. It is not. It's asking, do you have your undergraduate degree? There are some programs that are only available in financial aid for your first bachelor's degree. So you want to make sure that question is answered correctly. The next page asks a series of questions that if the answer to any of these is yes, then the student is independent. In Raya's case, they're all no, but let's look at them and just understand what these questions are. So number 1, is the student in active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Number 2, are they a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Third, do they have children or other people who they support, who they provide more than half of the support, and who live with them? Next, are they an orphan or a ward of the court? That is the student. Are they a student, orphan, or a ward of the court? Are they in foster care? Were they an emancipated minor, or were they in legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step parent? So if any of those are true, then the student's considered independent and doesn't need parent information. In this case, again, with Raya, it's very clear that none of these apply. She's going to click none of these apply and click next. So we're not done. There are a couple more questions to figure out if she's dependent or independent, but so far she's looking like she's a dependent student. The next question asks about homeless students. So this is asking Raya, are you alone without your parents? And are you either homeless or do you support yourself, but you're at risk of homelessness? So Raya's answering no, but if your answer is yes, and you go on, the question next will be, how are you documenting that? Is that because you are connected to someone who's a McKinney-Vento specialist through your high school? Are you staying in a transitional shelter? Do you want to meet with a financial aid officer to document that? There are lots of ways you can document that you're homeless or at risk of homelessness. If you can document that and provide that information, you're considered an independent student. Again, in this situation, Raya says no, so we're moving on. This is the last sort of catch-all question. And this tries to get at, are there other conditions that might make it unsafe for the student to contact their parents, either because they left home because of abuse, or they're abandoned by their parents or estranged, or they are a refugee, or they're a victim of human trafficking, or other reasons why it might be unsafe or unable for the student to contact their parents. Raya is answering no, but if you answer yes, you're considered what's called a provisionally independent student, and then you have to provide documentation about why you might be provisionally independent to your to your college or university so that they can understand why what's considered provisionally independent. So very important that in those situations, if that is true for you, that you reach out to your high school, or sorry, your college to let them know what the conditions are so that they can address and provide documentation for you and an avenue for you to document your situation. But again, in Raya's case, she's saying no, so we're going to move on. So basically, Raya has been determined to be a dependent student. So the student is asked at this point, are your parents able and willing to provide information? If your parents are unwilling, then Raya would only be able to be considered for a very small, unsubsidized loan. This answer says if your parents aren't willing to provide information, click yes, and we'll skip their information, and all you'll get is this very small loan. I would not recommend that. When I talk to families who are saying to their students, I don't want to pay for college, I don't want to fill out the FAFSA, often the problem is, frankly, that they just don't want to pay. But remember, the FAFSA doesn't require you to pay anything. And it's not, sorry, let me hold on one second. There we go. And it's not actually an application for payment, it's an application for eligibility. So all the FAFSA is going to do is determine what you're eligible for, not how much you can pay or whether you should pay it. So often when I explain that to parents, that takes care of some of the resistance around why should I fill out this form. So if you're a parent and you're concerned about what you might have to pay, FAFSA doesn't require you to pay anything. It just determines what your student is eligible for. So again, the best advice here is to click no and to move along. So now we're getting to parents, and we're going to get some information about Raya's parents because we need to know which parent or parents are going to fill out the form. And this asks a series of 3 questions. In Raya's case, it's pretty simple, but I'm going to go through the process just in case your situation is not as simple. So the question asks, are the parents married to each other? And Raya is saying, yes, my parents are married to each other. So you'll see it says provide information for both parents. So both mom and dad's information we need. What if Raya answered no? Let's say Raya's parents are not married to each other. The very next question would ask, are your parents unmarried but living together? Well, first of all, what's a parent? So you might think you know that. My little joke here is it's not a parent who's a parent. It's it's hard because I don't get your laughter on a phone, but or on an internet connection. But you can type "ha ha" in the chat if you want to. So are your parents married to each other? The parent in this case is the legal, either biological or adoptive parent. That's who we're asking about. So if your parents are unmarried and living together, we still want information on both of those parents. We still want both pieces of information. But what if your parents are divorced? What if they're not living together? Then which parent do you choose for the FAFSA? Well, the next question asks, which parent provides more financial support to the student or did over the last 12 months? Who paid more of the bills? Who paid for housing? Who paid for transportation? Who paid for food? Whichever parent that is the one that should complete the FAFSA with the student. Notice at this point, it doesn't ask who claims the student. It doesn't ask on the tax return. It doesn't ask who earns more. It doesn't ask where the student lives. What it asks is who pays for their expenses. That's really the question that determines which parent fills out the FAFSA. If the answer to that question is it's split evenly, so each parent pays half, or the answer is it's split evenly and nobody pays anything, then the student is told to choose the parent who has the greater income. or greater assets. That's who fills out the form. So to walk through an example, so Rebecca, my wife, and I were married. We have a child named Rachel. All of this is true, by the way. So we would be the parents of record for Rachel's application for financial aid. But let's say this is not true, but let's say Rebecca and I got divorced and I married a lovely woman named Colleen. And Colleen and I have Rachel living with us, but because Rebecca earns more, Rebecca is paying for all of Rachel's expenses. She gives that money to me in the form of child support, and I use it to pay Rachel's expenses. In that situation, even though Rachel is living with Colleen and with me, Rebecca would be the parent of record for the FAFSA, and Rebecca would be the one who completes the FAFSA. My information, Colleen's information, would not be on the form. Okay, well, let's say nobody pays to support Rachel. Rachel lives on her own, and Rebecca and I are divorced, but I have the greater income. Well, in that situation, Rachel would say, my dad, Daniel, is the one to complete the form. And because I have remarried Colleen, now Colleen's information is going to be required on the form as well, because it's important we get the entire family picture. So if this is complicated for you, or you have a particularly complicated situation, feel free to ask a question in the Q&A. But again, the first question is which parent? And then is that parent remarried? And if they are, the step parent's information is required as well. So as we move forward, the next screen is going to ask to provide information about the parents we've just defined. And it says just enter information about one of your parents. So in this case, the one parent is mom, it's Alcina Tran. And you can see that Raya is providing some information about Alcina. Now, a couple of things. First of all, really important that Raya knows her parents' legal name. So maybe her mom goes by Allie, but she's not going to type in Allie. She's going to type in Alcina. It needs to be the legal first and last name that matches Alcina's documents. And number two, you'll see that it asks for Alcina's date of birth. And remember, Raya is typing this in. So Raya needs to make sure to know what Alcina's date of birth is. She also, and this is where you may have a problem, the student also needs to know, Raya needs to know, what Alcina's social security number is. So she can type in the actual social security number for her mom, Alcina. Now, I will say in many cases, I didn't know my parents' social security number growing up. I doubt you know your parents' social security number. So really important that when a student does this section of the FAFSA, that they have their parents' social security number shared with them, because that social security number will link the parent, so it has to match the actual social security number for the parent. If you don't know your parent's social security number and you're a student, you do not want to click this box that says, my parent doesn't have an SSN. What we saw in a lot of cases is students didn't have their parents' SSN with them, so they just assumed that box was the box to check. That is not true. The only reason you would check that box is if your parent truly doesn't have an SSN. And if that's true, and you check that box, it will ask you if your parent has what's called an ITIN, which is an individual taxpayer identification number. And if not, that's fine. It will still allow the parent to complete the FAFSA. But we want to start with that SSN if the parent actually has one. Also important to put the parent's email address and click Send Invite. That will send an invitation directly to the parent. We'll look at what that looks like a little later, that invites them to start doing their section of the FAFSA. And once you do that, it moves on to the next page. Notice we don't have to put dad's information. We know mom and dad are married, but we don't have to put dad's information in yet. We'll ask about dad a little later. So we just finished section 1. I know that took a while. That's probably one of the hardest, if not the longest section of the application. The rest of this moves pretty quickly. The next section, you can see that we're in another section because we have that blue box. We're going to talk about student demographics. So the next 2 pages are really optional. And you'll see that because it says questions used for research purposes only. It doesn't have any impact on the age you offer. but the Department of Education is doing some research, so they ask you to share as a student, what is your gender, male, female, non-binary, or prefer not to answer? What is your race and ethnicity? Are you of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And then if not, or if so, what is the student's race? So we get both pieces of information. All of this information is optional. You can see Raya is clicking prefer not to answer. The next question is not optional, and this is about the student's the student's citizenship status. To receive federal financial aid, you must be, as a student, either a U.S. citizen or what's considered an eligible non-citizen. What is an eligible non-citizen? That includes people who have permanent residence, what you might have heard referred to as a green card, or people who I don't like this term, but people who are what are called legal aliens, or might have a refugee or asylee status. So in those situations, if you are considered an eligible non-citizen, you can receive federal financial aid. You may be there will be a database match against the Department of Homeland Security to confirm that you are an eligible non-citizen. And if it can't be confirmed, you may be asked to provide documentation to the college. Notice, though, that it's not about parent status. It's only about student citizenship status. So the student has to be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. Their parent or parents do not. The next question asks about your parents' educational status. This is not really required for financial aid purposes, but it's useful because a number of private foundations, some colleges, want to track first-generation students and want to provide additional financial aid or specialized financial aid for those students. So if your parents have not attended college, important to note that, or if one or both have attended but not completed, or one or both parents completed, those options are there. The next question asks whether your parent was killed in the line of duty, either because they were serving in the armed forces or because they were a public safety officer. If that is true and you provide documentation of that, there are special benefits that come to you via the Pell Grant. But again, if it's not true, and it will be not true for most of you, you click no and move on. The next question asks, what is your high school completion status? How did you earn your high school degree? Was it a diploma? Was it a GED? Were you homeschooled? It's required to complete high school before you can receive federal financial aid. So you have to choose your option. If it was a high school diploma, it asks you to identify the high school by searching for the high school and linking to that, and then confirming that information. And that's it for the second section, the demographics section. We now turn to finances. The finances section is also really, really quick, in large part because most of the information is going to be automatically carried over from the IRS. For the 24-25 FAFSA year, which is the year that we're heading into, it's going to be based on 2022 tax information. So automatically, all of your tax information for 2022 is going to be transferred over to the FAFSA. That's what the consent is for. That's why you gave consent. So we only need information really on 3 separate questions. And while most students aren't going to have these, I'm going to go through and answer or tell you about these questions because these will also show up on the parent side. And it's possible as a parent, you might have some of these types of income. So the first one is, did you roll over money from one retirement account to another retirement account? So sometimes parents may choose to move money from one retirement account to another because they've changed jobs or they want to collapse the different retirement plans they have. And it comes on your tax return as something called a pension payout, but it really is a rollover. So you're rolling money over from one account to another. What's important about that is if you do that, you want to make sure to note that here if you did that in 2022, because otherwise the financial aid office will count that as income. And it really wasn't income. It was just money being rolled from one account to another. The second question here asks, are there college grants or scholarships that you paid taxes on that were part of your income in 2022? This, again, is pretty unlikely. The only chance that you might have a taxable scholarship is if you receive so much scholarship that it was more than tuition, it was more than fees, it was more than books, more than other mandatory costs. So most likely you did not pay scholarship taxation on your scholarship, but if you did, we don't want that to be counted twice, so you put that amount here. The third kind of income is what's called foreign earned income. And the possibility here is, let's say I live in the US generally, but I've traveled overseas last year and I worked for a company based in London, England. And at the end of the year, I've paid my London, England taxes. The US government says you don't have to pay taxes twice. So you get to exclude that income from your tax return when you file your US tax return. But for purposes of financial aid, we need to know that. So we're asking you in that situation to indicate how much of that income was foreign earned income so we can reflect that in our analysis. So that's why it asks for that information. Again, for most people, that's going to be zero, but it is there as a piece of information. So then there are three asset questions. Again, for most families, this is going to be pretty simple, but let's talk about the asset questions. So the first asks, again, these are student assets, but you're going to see these again when we get to parent assets. The first asks, what is your current total cash of current total of cash, savings, and checking? So Raya answered she has about $500 in her account, and that is as of the day she's filing the form. The second question asks about businesses and investment farms. Well, it's unlikely that Raya owns an investment farm. Most students do not. Raya may have a small business. But again, remember, this question will also be asked of you as a parent. If you have a farm, not one you live on, but an investment farm, or you own a business, you're going to have to put that under your section as a parent. And it would be basically whatever the investment value of that business or farm is if you could sell it. That might include real property or assets you have in the property. And the third piece asks about all other investments, including real estate, but not the home the student lives in. So this might include rental real estate properties, if you have them, or money market accounts, or savings accounts that are stocks and bonds. But two things really important to note. We don't want to include retirement assets. So if a program or an account is specifically a retirement account, you do not include it. It's not your 401k plan. It's not your 403b plan. It's not your IRA plan. It's accounts that are other than retirement, and we're not reporting on home. So those two, the primary home you live in is also excluded from reporting. So we're now to the next section. That's all for finances. You might ask, where's the income? Where's the tax information? All of that is automatically transferred behind the scenes. So now we're to select your colleges. And using the FAFSA, you can apply to up to 20 colleges with one FAFSA. Really important to understand, you don't have to be admitted to the college. You don't even really have to have applied for admission to the college to complete the FAFSA. You can do the FAFSA for any of the colleges and just make sure your information is there. So if you're a student looking at possible spring attendance and you don't know what college you want to go to, that's okay. Go ahead and list them all, the colleges you might wind up applying to, and go ahead and complete the form. And much like before, to find the college, you can just look them up by name, by state, or by school code. Colleges will have a 6-digit code they can provide to you, which will help you find them if you just want to look by school code as well. You'll confirm the schools you want to include. You can see Raya so far has selected 4. And that's really it. So now Raya has done her section. Now, here's another common mistake. Some students just exit the form at this point. You're not done. You need to sign the application. Really important that the student finish all the way to the end. And you'll see they haven't signed because you'll see the green check boxes in the sections they've done, but they have not yet completed the student signature section. On this page, they can expand any of these arrows and check the answers they've provided and go back and fix anything if they think they've done something wrong or want to change an answer. Once you click through, it will then show you what is required, which information is required from your parent. And if a parent has done their section, you would see those with green check boxes as well. You can see that Alcina Tran has been sent an invitation, and we're waiting for her to start her section of the application. Once you've gone through that, the very next page is the signature page. And as I said before, really important you navigate to the bottom of that page, click the box that says I agree to the terms outlined above, and click sign. If you do not do that, you have not yet signed your application. The application will be rejected. But once you've signed the application, the student has done their section, and now it's time to turn to the parent section, which we'll move rather quickly through because it is pretty quick. There's mostly repeats of what we've seen. When Raya completes her section, or you do, she got a note that said, you're almost there. Here's who we've sent your invitation to, and here's what we know about where they are right now. And Raya can log back in and check that as she goes. So remember I said that at the point Raya invited her mom, Alcina was sent an email. This is what that email will look like. It will say, get started. It says, help complete Raya's form. Raya can't be eligible for financial aid without your input. So what Alcina needs to do, assuming she has an FSA ID, is she just needs to click on that Get Started button, and that will take her to a web page where she can log in to her FSA ID. Remember, as I said, at least one parent needs to have that FSA ID. And here's Raya's mom's information. If she didn't have one, she could click Create an Account and create one for herself and wait the 1 to 3 days while the department confirms her FSA ID before she does her FAFSA. Really important, if you're sharing a computer between parent and student, at this point you want to make sure that the student has logged out and that you as a parent have logged in. I've seen situations where you haven't done that and it doesn't work because now you're still in the student record. So you want to make sure to log out as a student, re-log back in as a parent. So a lot of this is going to look familiar. So Raya's mom is logged in. She's going to see a page that says, Raya wants your help to complete her FAFSA. Do you want to accept the invitation? Raya's mom says, sure, I'll accept that invitation. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And it tells you why and what about this application. Why have you been selected? What will you have to provide? Does it mean I'm responsible for paying for college? As you see, no. Just providing your consent doesn't make you financially responsible for the education costs. And then it's going to enter the same 4 videos we saw before. So we've got the onboarding videos, just like we had for Raya. And we have the confirmation page, just like we had for Raya. And we have the consent page, again, just like we had on the student side. So the parent needs to provide consent. So now we're going to move to the parent demographics section. Again, some of this is going to look familiar. There's a couple of new questions that we see. The first is we're going to ask for parents' marital status. Now you'll see, by the way, also, remember Raya's form had 5 sections. Raya's mom's section only has 3. There are really only 3 sections to do, just demographics, financials, and signing. So it moves pretty quickly. Under demographics, we're going to ask, what is Raya's mom's marital status? She's going to say married. But remember, we talked about before, you might be remarried or separated or divorced or widowed. Important to put your current marital status. We talked about this as well. This is state of legal residence. Raya's mom is going to put where she lives. And if her husband's lived there longer, she's going to use that date just to make sure that they get the longest amount of time that they've lived in the state. And that's it for demographics. And we move now to finances. So it moves rather quickly. The very next page asks, do you as a family qualify for certain federal benefits? Why is it asking this? And by the way, the federal benefits include things like housing assistance, free or reduced school lunch, Medicaid, SNAP, SSI, TANF, etc. Why is it asking for this? It's asking for this because there's a beneficial treatment in terms of eligibility if you qualify for one of these programs. So if you do, please check it. If you don't, that's fine. Please say none of these apply. The next questions ask about your filing status. So did you file a 2022 IRS Form 1040 or 1040 NR? If the answer is yes, click yes. If the answer is no, it will ask you why not. Is it because you didn't earn enough income? Is it because you or a foreign resident who files a tax return in a foreign country? Do you work for a company that doesn't, like, for example, the World Bank, that doesn't actually require you to file a tax return because that income's not necessarily connected to a country? In most cases, you're going to answer yes to this as a parent. But if you didn't file a return, you can click no and say, I didn't file because I didn't earn enough to be required to file. The next question asks, did or will you file a joint tax return with your current spouse? Here's really an important piece of information. If you are married, but you file separately, or if you're married and you don't file taxes, either of you, or one of you files single and one of you files head of household, in those situations, both parents will have to be contributors to the FAFSA. The way to think about this is if you have an IRS record or you have no IRS record as a parent, we have to match each one of you to the IRS to make sure we get your information. If, on the other hand, you're married and you file together, you only have one record with the IRS, so only one of you has to be a contributor on the FAFSA. So in Raya's case, her mom and dad file together. They file married, filing jointly. So because of that, there's only one record that they need to pull, and that is the one that's of the two of them. So in Raya's case, only one parent has to be a contributor. But if, let's say, Raya's parents filed married separately, or one didn't file, then they would have to do two separate contributor records, and each one would have to log in separately. The next question asks about family size. What is your family size? Now, by default, it's going to count the number of exemptions that you had on your tax return. So if in Raya's case, let's say there are three on her tax return. There was Raya, there was Raya's mom, and there was Raya's dad. So 3 would be the number that would automatically come over. But in Raya's case, Raya has a new baby brother or sister who was just born. And that baby was born after the 2022 taxes were filed. And as a result, they want to increase the number in their family from 3 to 4. So what you'll see here is Raya's answered, there's one more member of my family that wasn't on that tax return. Please include them. If that's not your case, you can just say no and move on. But in her case, it's a different number in the family. So she's going to click yes, and she's going to tell them how many that is. The next question asks, in your family, how many people are going to college next year? Don't include your parents. So it's just Raya. So she's going to put 1. This really is just for information. It's not used in the formula, but it's information for the college and others to have as they look at your overall situation. And now we're going to move to the financial questions, and they're pretty basic. Again, many of these are repeats. So you'll see, again, pension rollover, college grants and scholarships, foreign earned income exclusion, like we talked about before. The new question is this one. It says, did the parents receive the earned income credit? If you don't know, the earned income credit is a credit that goes on your tax return that for lowest income families with children allows an offset to help be a refund back to families as an income source at the end of the year for filing their tax return. If you don't qualify for it, just click no. If you do, you would say yes and move on. Assets, you'll see it's much the same as we asked about before: cash and savings, business investment, other investment, including real estate. But the one new question is annual child support received. If you as a parent receive child support, you're going to put here the amount of child support you received for the last calendar year, last complete calendar year. Because we're sitting here in 2024, that would be 2023. Remember, your income was based on 2022, but we're asking here, did you receive child support? And if to help support any children in your household, and if so, how much did you actually receive in the last complete calendar year? If it's 0 or you don't receive child support, put 0 and move on. Last, we're going to ask about that other parent. So in Alcina's case, it's Travis, who's the husband. We're going to ask for some information about Travis. in case there's information that's necessary. We're not going to collect information from Travis because, as we said, this is a married filing joint family. They don't need his information, but it's important to provide his information on the form itself. So you're revealing or disclosing who that other parent is. So that's really it. So the parent's now going to go through, they're going to review their section just like the student. They're not going to close the browser because they haven't yet signed the application. They need to make sure they sign it. So on the next page, here is where I'll see this going to click, yes, I agree. She's going to click sign and submit, and she is now done. And as a result, Raya will get an email that says, congratulations, your FAFSA has been completed. And with that, that is what you will need to turn into us to qualify for your reimbursement of the $20 or your gift of the $20 Amazon gift card. It's that email that comes from the Department of Education saying, congratulations, we have processed your FAFSA. So the rest of this information just gives you lots of other scenarios. But again, that's going to be the one we recommend as the best scenario to follow. What I do want to do as we're here, though, is share with you a couple of resources, and we will follow up tonight with an email that lists these resources for you. But to begin, many of you signed up for tonight using this link to Family FAFSA. It's at familyfafsa.com, where you can find it at browardbridgetolife.com/familyfafsa. If you go down to the bottom of the page, you'll see a link to the PowerPoint and PDF that we used tonight. So at the bottom of this note from the federal government is the 312-page FAFSA form preview, either in PowerPoint or in PDF. If you would like to download it for your use, you can feel free to do that, but that is how you can find that presentation we went through this evening. Again, the way you access it is going to familyfafsa.com at the very bottom of the page. If you have questions after tonight, you can reach us at fafsaeducate@gmail.com. That is our direct email address. You can also reach me personally, and I will type this in the chat at dbarkowitz@gmail.com. That is my Gmail address. So that is the way to reach out to me directly, and that is in the chat. What I will say as well is to complete and receive your Amazon gift card, there's a form through Google, which we've created through Google Forms. And you do need to have, I believe, a Google account. But you enter your first and last name, your email address, your phone number, your race, ethnicity, the name of the high school you attended, and you upload the copy of that email. It can be a JPEG or a PDF that says, the email says, we received your FAFSA form, and here's what the sample text will look like. And you can upload that text, that copy of that proof, and click submit, and we will turn around and process your $20 gift and get that sent to the email address that is provided here as your email address. So with that, I don't think we've had any questions that have come through. I would invite, if you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in the Q&A, and we're happy to take your questions and provide any other information we can. I promised you about an hour presentation. We are right at 7:05. We'll be here for a while longer if there are questions. So I will stall for a minute. And also feel free, if you don't have questions, just to say, great job, or this was confusing, or thank you in the chat as well. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we will be reaching back to you for that. Remember, we'll also reach back to you to give you a copy of the PowerPoint, copy of the recording from tonight, and a link to the pages that I've mentioned already tonight. So with that, let's see, any additional questions that folks have? Colleen, anything you would like to add as we begin to head into wrap up?
Just the fact that we will go to the end of August for the gift cards, for the submissions. If you mentioned already, okay.
Great. So yeah, as a reminder, while FAFSA is open for a while, our gift program is not. So if you want to take advantage of the Amazon gift card that does have to be completed by the form has to be turned in by the end of August. So please make sure that you do that so that we can make sure to send you back the gift card from Amazon that you have earned.
And I would just add, I mean, we don't have questions, but we've got a nationally renowned financial aid expert in Daniel Barkowitz. So
Thank you.
you've got him live right now. Do not hesitate if you have a question. We've got so many people here on hand to help address them. Otherwise, you can follow up after the fact, but we welcome your questions for sure.
The other thing that I'll point out while we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, I will go back and share just a bit about what happens next. So once the student does complete their application, they will receive what's called a FAFSA submission summary. And I just want to show that to you very briefly to make sure that you understand what that is good for and what might be possible. So with the FAFSA submission summary, that's an email that will come from the department that's a link to the online website. And basically, if at some point you want to correct something, let's say you made an error or there's a mistake or you need to fix something or you need to add a school, you can do that using that FAFSA submission summary. So once you log in and say, I've already completed a FAFSA, you'll be taken to this page, which will tell you a little bit about whether you're eligible for the Pell Grant, how much loans you might qualify for. It won't tell you about institutional aid, but it will tell you about federal aid. It'll also tell you your index number. That's the number that we use at the school to determine how much federal aid you qualify for. And it does give you all of your FAFSA answers again, along with the ability to click on make a correction if you need to make any corrections to the information. As well, you will see a list of the schools you've applied to and some information about them, their graduation rate, retention rate, etc. So you can see some basic information about the institutions you've applied to and gives you, again, some more information. So just as a background, that information is available for you once you log in and once the FAFSA form itself is processed. It can take 1 to 3 days for the FAFSA form to be processed after you click submit before that, that piece will come forward. I realized, I think, was I not sharing as I did all of that? I wasn't, was I?
No, you were.
I was. Okay, great. So with that, I think that's going to wrap it up for us tonight. I want to thank all of you for your time and your attention. As I said, we'll be in touch. We'll get you a copy of the recording for tonight and the links to those web pages. If you need any additional information, please feel free to reach out to us by email. Since this is our last in our series of 8 events for the summer, I just want to extend my gratitude and appreciation again, both to Broward Educational Foundation and Bridge to Life, and to Colleen, Tron, and Stefan for their support and help throughout this process, and also to all of our financial aid office volunteers who've taken time out of their evenings and weekends to be with us throughout the course of the last several months. This has been a labor of love because we all believe in what we're doing, and we want to make we want to make it possible for students to succeed in attaining their educational dreams, regardless of their financial background. So we really hope you continue to partner with us. Stay tuned as we move into 25, 26 and start making plans for next year. But we do want to encourage all of you to get your 24, 25 FAFSA done. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. It's been a real pleasure, and hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been an honor to work with you.